The morning sun cast long shadows across the grounds of Windsor Castle as Prince William stood at the tall windows of his private study. His hands trembled slightly as he held the letter that had arrived just an hour ago. The royal seal was broken, and the contents had shaken him to his core. Kate entered the room quietly, her footsteps muffled by the thick Persian carpet. She had been looking for him after noticing his absence from their usual morning tea. "William, you missed breakfast with the children," she said softly, concern evident in her voice. "Charlotte was asking for you." He turned slowly, and Kate immediately noticed the pallor of his face. His usually bright eyes were clouded with an emotion she couldn't quite identify. Fear? Anger? Disappointment? In their years of marriage, she had learned to read his expressions, but this was different. "Kate, we need to talk," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. He gestured toward the leather chairs by the fireplace, the same spot where they had shared countless conversations about their future, their children, and their roles within the royal family. She approached cautiously, her maternal instincts telling her that something significant had shifted in their world. The letter in his hand seemed to carry weight beyond its physical presence. As she settled into her chair, William remained standing, pacing slightly as he often did when wrestling with difficult decisions. "What is it?" she asked, reaching out her hand toward him. "You're scaring me." William stopped pacing and looked directly at her. The woman who had stood by his side through scandals, public scrutiny, and the immense pressure of royal life. The woman who had given him 3 beautiful children and had somehow managed to maintain her grace and dignity, despite the constant spotlight. She deserved to know everything. "It's about the succession," he began, his voice gaining strength. "There's been a development that changes everything we thought we knew about our future." Kate's breath caught in her throat. The succession had always been a topic they discussed in abstract terms, something that would happen far in the future when King Charles was much older. They had planned their lives around a gradual transition, years of preparation, and a natural progression of responsibilities. "The king is not well, Kate," William continued, sitting down across from her. "Much worse than they've been telling the public. The doctors have given him months, not years." The words hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Kate felt her world tilt slightly, as if the foundation of everything they had built together was shifting beneath their feet. She had grown close to Charles over the years, had come to respect and care for him not just as a king, but as a grandfather to their children and a father figure to William. "How long have you known?" she asked, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "I suspected something during our last family dinner," William admitted. He seemed frailer, more tired than usual. "But this letter confirms what I feared. He wants to discuss the transition immediately. Not in years, Kate, in months." Kate stood up and moved to the window, looking out at the gardens where George, Charlotte, and Louis had played just yesterday. Their laughter still seemed to echo in the air, a reminder of the innocent childhood that was about to change dramatically. She thought about the conversation she would need to have with them, the way their lives would transform overnight. "The children," she whispered, more to herself than to William. "I know," he said, joining her at the window. "Everything we've tried to protect them from, all the normalcy we've fought to give them, it's going to change." They stood together in silence, watching the gardeners tend to the roses that Kate had personally selected years ago. Those roses had become a symbol of her attempt to create something beautiful and lasting in a world that often felt temporary and uncertain. Now even those roses would take on new meaning as part of the legacy she would inherit as the future queen consort. "There's more," William said, breaking the silence. "The letter mentions a private meeting with the entire family this afternoon. Everyone will be there. Charles, Camilla, Anne, Edward, Sophie, even Harry." Kate's head snapped toward him at the mention of Harry's name. The relationship between the brothers had been strained for years, particularly after Harry's departure from royal duties and his subsequent interviews and memoir. The thought of facing him during such an emotional and pivotal moment added another layer of complexity to an already overwhelming situation. "Harry's coming?" she asked, unable to hide her surprise. "Apparently," Charles insisted. He wants the whole family present when he makes his announcement official. Kate felt tears beginning to form in her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming weight of what was coming. She had married William knowing this day would eventually arrive, but she had imagined it happening when they were older, more experienced, more prepared. She thought of her own parents, how they would react to the news and how their quiet life in Berkshire would be forever changed by association. "I'm not ready," she admitted, the words escaping before she could stop them. William moved closer and took her hands in his. They were warm and steady, a comfort she had come to rely on throughout their relationship. "Neither am I," he said honestly, "but we'll face it together, just like we always have." The clock on the mantel chimed 10 o'clock, reminding them that time was moving forward whether they were ready or not. In just a few hours they would sit in that formal drawing room with the rest of the royal family and hear words that would change the course of British history. Kate squeezed William's hands and looked into his eyes. She saw the young man she had fallen in love with at university, but also the future king he was about to become. The transformation would not be easy, but she knew with certainty that they would face it together, as they had faced everything else in their lives. The grand drawing room at Windsor Castle had never felt more imposing than it did that afternoon. Kate smoothed her navy dress for the third time, a nervous habit she had developed over years of public appearances. The room was filled with faces she knew well, yet the atmosphere was unlike any family gathering they had experienced before. King Charles sat at the head of the long mahogany table, his usually commanding presence somehow diminished by the weight of what he was about to share. William sat beside her, his jaw tense with the knowledge he already carried. Across the table, Princess Anne maintained her characteristic composure, though Kate noticed the way her fingers drummed silently against the polished wood. Prince Edward and Sophie exchanged worried glances, while Queen Camilla's eyes never left her husband's face, as if she could somehow transfer her strength to him through sheer will. The most surprising presence was Harry, who had arrived just minutes before the meeting began. Kate had watched through the window as his car pulled up the long driveway, her heart racing with a mixture of emotions she couldn't quite name. When he entered the room, the tension was palpable. He nodded politely to everyone, his eyes lingering on William for just a moment longer than the others, before taking his seat at the far end of the table. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Charles began, his voice carrying the familiar authority of decades of royal duty, yet somehow softer than usual. "What I'm about to share with you will not leave this room until we decide together how to proceed." Kate felt William's hand find hers under the table, their fingers intertwining in a gesture of mutual support that had become second nature over their years together. She glanced around the room, noting how each family member had their own way of preparing for difficult news. Anne sat straighter, Edward leaned forward slightly, and Harry's expression remained carefully neutral. "My health has taken a turn that my doctors and I can no longer ignore," Charles continued, each word measured and deliberate. "The treatments I've been receiving are no longer effective, and the time I have remaining is significantly shorter than we had hoped." The silence that followed was deafening. Kate heard her own heartbeat in her ears and felt the sudden urge to reach out to comfort Camilla, whose composed facade had cracked just slightly. But protocol and the weight of the moment kept her frozen in her chair. "How long?" Anne asked, her military training evident in her direct approach to the difficult question. "6 months, perhaps less," Charles replied, his honesty brutal in its simplicity. Kate watched as the reality of those words settled over each person in the room. Harry's carefully maintained neutrality slipped for just a moment, revealing the pain of a son facing the loss of his father. Edward's hand found Sophie's, mirroring her own connection with William. Even in this moment of family crisis, the formal structure of royal hierarchy seemed to dissolve, leaving only human beings grappling with mortality and change. "The crown cannot wait," Charles continued, his voice growing stronger as he moved into the practical matters that had defined his life. "The transition must begin immediately. William, You and Catherine need to be prepared to assume your roles, much sooner than we had planned. Kate felt the room's attention shift to her and William, the weight of their future responsibilities suddenly very real and immediate. She had spent years preparing for this moment. But the acceleration of the timeline felt overwhelming. The children's faces flashed in her mind, their innocent questions about why Granddad looked tired, their excitement about visits to the palace, their blissful unawareness of the duty that awaited them. What does that mean practically? William asked, his voice steady despite the emotion Kate could see in his eyes. It means we begin the formal preparation process next week, Charles replied. Meetings with the private secretary, briefings on state matters, transition of patronages, and gradual assumption of duties. The public announcement will come in stages, allowing for a smooth transition that maintains stability. Harry spoke, for the first time since entering the room. What do you need from me? His question was simple but loaded with years of complicated family dynamics. Charles looked at his younger son with an expression that mixed love, regret, and hope. I need, you hear, Harry? Whatever differences we've had, whatever choices have been made, you're my son and William's brother. This family needs to be united during this transition. Kate watched the exchange between father and son, feeling the weight of history and the possibility of healing. She thought about her own role in the family dynamics, how her presence had sometimes been a bridge between the brothers, and how much more important that role might become in the coming months. The children, Kate said suddenly, her voice cutting through the formal discussion. We need to think about how this affects George, Charlotte, and Louis. They're so young and their lives are about to change dramatically. Camilla spoke for the first time, her voice gentle but firm. We'll help with that transition, Catherine. All of us. This isn't something you and William have to face alone. The offer of support was both touching and necessary. Kate had always felt somewhat outside the royal family's inner circle, despite years of marriage and 3 children. But in this moment of crisis, she felt truly embraced as part of something larger than herself. There's something else, Charles said, his tone shifting slightly. The matter of the Prince of Wales title and the Duchy of Cornwall. These will transfer to William immediately upon my abdication, which I intend to announce within the month. The word abdication sent shockwaves through the room. Kate had expected a gradual transition, a slow assumption of duties as Charles's health declined. But an abdication meant immediate and total change, a complete transformation of their lives and roles. Father, are you certain? William asked, his composure finally beginning to crack. I am, Charles replied firmly. I've watched what happened to your grandmother, how the prolonged uncertainty affected the institution and the family. I won't put the crown through that kind of speculation and instability. Kate admired his decisiveness, even as she felt overwhelmed by its implications. In a matter of weeks, she would go from being the Duchess of Cambridge to the Princess of Wales, a title that carried enormous historical weight and public expectation. The thought of following in Diana's footsteps, of living up to that legacy, while forging her own path, was both inspiring and terrifying. As the meeting continued into the late afternoon, plans were made, timelines established, and responsibilities outlined. Through it all, Kate found herself studying the faces around the table, these people who would be her partners in leading the monarchy into its next chapter. The weight of history pressed down on her shoulders, but so did the strength of the family bond that was being forged in this moment of crisis and change. 3 weeks had passed since that life-changing family meeting, and the walls of Kensington Palace had never felt more like a protective barrier between Kate and the world outside. She stood in the children's playroom, watching George help Louis build a tower with wooden blocks while Charlotte arranged her dolls for an elaborate tea party. The normalcy of the scene felt precious and fragile, like something she needed to memorize before it changed forever. Mummy, when is Granddad Charles coming to visit again? Charlotte asked, looking up from her carefully arranged miniature cups and saucers. I made him a special invitation to my tea party. Kate's heart clenched at the innocence in her daughter's voice. They had decided to wait until after the public announcement to have the difficult conversation with the children about their grandfather's health and what it meant for their family, But keeping such a monumental secret while maintaining normal family life had proven more challenging than either she or William had anticipated. "Soon, darling," Kate replied, kneeling down to join the tea party. "Granddad has been very busy with important work lately." George looked up from his block tower, his 7-year-old intuition picking up on the subtle changes in his parents' behavior over the past few weeks. "Is Granddad sick? Papa seems worried about him." The directness of the question caught Kate off guard. She had always prided herself on being honest with her children while protecting them from harsh realities they weren't ready to understand. But this situation tested those principles in ways she hadn't anticipated. "Granddad isn't feeling his best right now," she said carefully, "but he has very good doctors taking care of him." Before George could ask more questions, William appeared, in the doorway, his expression serious. Kate recognized the look immediately. It was the same expression he had worn after each of his private meetings with his father over the past 3 weeks. The weight of impending responsibility had settled on his shoulders like a heavy cloak, and she could see how it was affecting him. "Kate, we need to talk," he said quietly, glancing meaningfully toward the children. She rose from the floor, brushing imaginary dust from her jeans. "Children, I need to speak with Papa for a few minutes. Continue your games and we'll be right back." They walked together to William's study, a room that had become their private sanctuary for difficult conversations. The walls were lined with books about constitutional history and royal protocol, volumes that had taken on new urgency in recent weeks. On his desk lay several official documents marked with the royal seal, reminders of the transition that was accelerating with each passing day. "The announcement is scheduled for tomorrow afternoon," William said without preamble. "Father wants to address the nation at 4 o'clock. Kate sank into the familiar leather chair across from his desk, the reality of what was coming hitting her like a physical force. Tomorrow, their private family crisis would become public property. Every newspaper, television station, and social media platform would dissect their lives, speculate about their readiness, and judge their every move. "So, we ready?" she asked, though they both knew the answer. "We have to be," William replied, moving to stand by the window. "The briefing papers are prepared. The transition plan is in place, and the children's school has been notified about the security changes they'll need to implement." Kate thought about those security changes, how George, Charlotte, and Louis would wake up next week to a world where their every movement was scrutinized and protected. They had worked so hard to give their children as normal a childhood as possible, and now that carefully constructed normalcy was about to shatter. "How do we tell them?" she asked, voicing the question that had been keeping her awake at night. William turned from the window, his expression softening as he focused on their shared concern. "Together, tonight after dinner. We explain what's happening in terms they can understand, and we reassure them that while things will change, our family will always come first." The sound of laughter drifted in from the playroom, and Kate felt tears prick at her eyes. In just 24 hours, that carefree laughter would be forever altered by the weight of royal duty and public expectation. She thought about her own childhood, growing up in a loving but ordinary family in Berkshire, and how different her children's experience would be. "There's something else," William continued, his tone becoming more formal. "Harry called this morning. He wants to be here for the announcement to show family unity. He's flying in tonight." Kate's emotions about Harry's presence were complicated. On one hand, she appreciated his desire to support the family during this difficult time. On the other hand, his attendance would inevitably draw media attention to their reconciliation, turning what should be a solemn moment into a spectacle about family drama. "How do you feel about that?" she asked carefully, knowing that William's relationship with his brother remained delicate despite the recent family meeting. "Honestly, grateful," William admitted. "Whatever has happened between us, he's still my brother and he's still Father's son. Having him there tomorrow feels right." Kate nodded, understanding the complexity of family relationships under public scrutiny. She had learned over the years that royal family dynamics were rarely simple, influenced as they were by protocol, tradition, and the constant awareness that private moments could become public scandals. The private secretary wants to meet with us again this evening, William continued, referring to the series of intensive briefings they had been receiving about their new roles. There are still several matters of protocol we need to finalize before tomorrow. Kate thought about those briefings. Hours spent learning about constitutional procedures, state functions, and the intricate web of relationships that defined the modern monarchy. She had studied these topics for years, but the theoretical knowledge was very different from the practical reality of assuming such responsibilities. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm strong enough for this," she admitted, a rare moment of vulnerability. William moved to her chair and knelt beside it, taking her hands in his. "You're the strongest person I know, Kate. You've already proven that in how you've handled everything that's come before. This is just the next chapter." She looked into his eyes and saw not just her husband but the future king. The transition would be difficult for both of them, but she knew they would face it together. The thought of standing beside him as he assumed the throne filled her with both pride and trepidation. "The children will adapt," William continued, reading her thoughts. "They're resilient and they have us to guide them through it." Kate squeezed his hands, drawing strength from his confidence. "You're right. We've prepared for this our entire marriage, even when we hoped it wouldn't happen so soon." A knock at the study door interrupted their conversation. "Your Royal Highnesses," came the voice of their private secretary. "I apologize for the interruption, but there are several urgent matters that require your attention before this evening's briefing." As they prepared to face another series of meetings and preparations, Kate took a moment to look around the study that had been their refuge. Tomorrow, everything would change, but their commitment to each other and to their family would remain constant. The door to their future was opening whether they felt ready or not. The morning of the announcement dawned gray and overcast, as if the weather itself understood the gravity of what was to come. Kate stood before her wardrobe, contemplating her choice of outfit with more care than usual. Today, every detail would be scrutinized, analyzed, and interpreted by millions of people around the world. The simple black dress she selected felt appropriate, respectful of the circumstances while maintaining the dignity expected of her position. Downstairs, the breakfast table was unusually quiet. George pushed his cereal around his bowl without eating, while Charlotte kept glancing between her parents with the intuitive awareness that children possess when sensing adult tension. Louis, blissfully unaware at his young age, chattered about his plans for the day as if it were any other morning. "Papa, why are there so many cars outside?" George asked, having noticed the increased security presence during his morning glance out the window. William and Kate exchanged a look across the table. They had planned to wait until after school to have the conversation about what was happening, but the visible changes to their routine were making it impossible to maintain the pretense of normalcy. "Actually, we need to talk to you all about something very important," William said, setting down his coffee cup with deliberate care. "Come sit with us in the living room." The children sensed the seriousness in their father's tone and followed without their usual protests or delays. Kate arranged them on the comfortable sofa, with Louis on her lap and George and Charlotte flanking them on either side. William pulled a chair close so he could maintain eye contact with all three children. "You know that Granddad Charles is the king, and someday Papa will be king too," William began, using the simple terms they had established for discussing royal succession with the children. "Like in the fairy tales?" Charlotte asked, her eyes bright with interest. "Similar, but this is real life," Kate said gently. "And sometimes in real life, things happen faster than we expect them to." William took a deep breath before continuing. "Granddad Charles is not feeling well, and he has decided that it's time for Papa to become king sooner than we thought. Today he's going to tell everyone in the country about this decision." George's expression grew serious as he processed this information. "Does that mean you're going to be queen, Mama?" he asked Kate. "It means I'm going to help Papa in his new job, just like I help him now," Kate replied, choosing her words carefully. "And it means that all of our lives are going to change in some ways, but the most important things will stay the same." "What important things?" Charlotte wanted to know. "We'll still live here at Kensington Palace," William assured them. "You'll still go to the same school, still have the same friends, and most importantly, we'll still be a family who loves each other very much." Louis, who had been playing with Kate's bracelet during the conversation, suddenly looked up with concern. "Will there be more people taking pictures of us?" he asked, referring to the photographers who occasionally appeared during their public outings. Kate's heart ached at the perceptiveness of his question. "Yes, sweetheart, there probably will be. But we have people whose job it is to keep us safe and to make sure the photographers don't bother us too much." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with the children asking questions that ranged from practical, "Will we have different bedrooms?" to profound, "Will Granddad Charles die?" Kate and William answered each question as honestly as they could while providing the reassurance that their children needed. By noon, the palace was bustling with activity. As preparations for the announcement reached their peak, Kate found herself in the formal drawing room where the family would gather to watch the king's address together. Harry had arrived that morning, and despite the years of tension between the brothers, his presence provided an unexpected comfort. "Are you holding up?" Harry asked Kate privately as they waited for the others to join them. "Some moments I feel ready, others I feel completely overwhelmed," she admitted. "It's happening so fast." "You'll be brilliant," Harry said with conviction. "You always have been. The country is lucky to have you." His words meant more to Kate than she had expected. Despite their complicated history, Harry's approval carried weight, and his support during this transition felt like a gift. King Charles entered the room at exactly 3:45 p.m., 15 minutes before his scheduled address. He looked frailer than he had just weeks earlier, but his bearing remained regal and determined. Queen Camilla walked beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm in a gesture of support that spoke volumes about their partnership. "Are we all ready?" Charles asked, his gaze moving around the room to include each family member. "As ready as we can be," William replied, speaking for all of them. They gathered around the large television, an oddly domestic scene considering the historic nature of what they were about to witness. Kate held William's hand tightly as the familiar music of a royal address began to play, followed by the sight of Charles seated at his desk in Buckingham Palace. "My dear people," the king began, his voice steady and clear despite his declining health. "I address you today to share news that will affect our nation and our Commonwealth. After much consideration and in consultation with my family and advisors, I have decided to abdicate the throne in favor of my son William, Prince of Wales." Kate felt the words wash over her like a wave, making everything suddenly and irrevocably real. Beside her, William's grip on her hand tightened, and she could see the weight of kingship settling on his shoulders as his father continued speaking. "This decision has not been made lightly," Charles continued. "However, recent developments in my health have made it clear that our great nation deserves a monarch who can serve with full vigor and dedication. Prince William has prepared for this role his entire life, and I have complete confidence in his ability to lead us into the future." The address continued for another 10 minutes, outlining the transition timeline and expressing gratitude for the nation's support. When it concluded, the room fell into silence as the magnitude of what had just occurred settled over them all. "Well," Charles said finally, turning to face his family, "it's done." Kate looked around the room at the faces of people who would now be her partners in serving the crown. The door to their old life had closed forever, and the door to their new destiny stood wide open before them. The first rays of dawn were filtering through the heavy curtains of Buckingham Palace as Kate stood in what would soon be her private apartment. The moving process had begun immediately after the abdication announcement 3 days ago, and the ancient palace was alive with the controlled chaos of transition. Boxes lined the hallways, staff members hurried past with clipboards and concerned expressions, and everywhere she looked, Kate saw reminders that her life had fundamentally changed forever. William had left early that morning for his first official meeting with the Privy Council as the new king. She had watched him dress in his formal morning coat, straightening his tie with the same careful attention she had observed countless times before, but now every gesture carried the weight of monarchy. When he kissed her goodbye, she tasted the salt of tears she hadn't realized she was shedding. "Your Majesty," came a soft voice from the doorway, and Kate turned to see Mrs. Henderson, who would now serve as her principal lady-in-waiting. The title still felt foreign, like a costume she wasn't sure she could wear convincingly. "Please, just call me Catherine when we're alone," Kate said, managing a smile despite her emotional exhaustion. Mrs. Henderson approached with a tablet containing the day's schedule, but Kate found herself staring past the screen toward the gardens visible through the tall windows. Somewhere out there, beyond the palace walls, the world was adjusting to the news that had dominated every headline for the past 72 hours. The British public was experiencing their own period of adjustment, and Kate wondered how many of them felt as unprepared as she did. "Ma'am, forgive me," Mrs. Henderson said gently, "but there's something you should see." She handed Kate a tablet displaying the morning's news coverage, and what Kate saw took her breath away. Thousands of people had gathered outside Buckingham Palace, many holding signs of support and encouragement. Children held handmade drawings of the royal family. Elderly couples sat on folding chairs as if prepared to wait all day, and everywhere she looked, Kate saw expressions of hope and expectation. "They're here for you and His Majesty," Mrs. Henderson explained. "They want to show their support during this transition." Kate felt overwhelmed by the display of public affection, but also by the enormous responsibility it represented. These people believed in the monarchy, believed in her and William, and expected them to provide the kind of leadership that would justify their faith and loyalty. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her mother. "Darling, we're so proud of you. Remember that no matter what title you carry, you're still our Kate. We love you." The familiar words from her parents provided an anchor of normalcy in a world that had become almost unrecognizably formal and complicated. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts, and Kate was surprised to see Harry enter the room. He had stayed for the past few days, participating in family meetings and providing support during the most difficult moments of the transition. His presence had been a source of comfort for William, and Kate was grateful for the healing that seemed to be occurring between the brothers. "How are you managing?" Harry asked, his tone more serious than she was used to hearing from him. "Honestly, I feel like I'm drowning some days and treading water on the good ones," Kate admitted. "I keep waiting for someone to tell me I'm not qualified for this, that there's been some mistake." Harry sat down across from her, his expression understanding. "I remember feeling that way when I first started taking on major royal duties. The difference is, you actually are qualified. You've been preparing for this role for over a decade, even if you didn't know the timeline would accelerate like this." Kate appreciated his perspective, but the practical reality of her new position felt overwhelming. Every decision she made would be scrutinized, every public appearance analyzed, every outfit choice interpreted as a statement about her priorities and values. The freedom to make mistakes, to learn gradually, had been compressed into an impossibly short time frame. "The children are struggling too," she confided. "George keeps asking if he's going to become king tomorrow, and Charlotte is worried that she won't be able to have friends over anymore. Louis is too young to understand, but he can sense the tension." "They'll adapt because they have you and William as parents," Harry said with conviction. "You've done an incredible job protecting their childhood while preparing them for their futures. That foundation will carry them through this transition." Kate thought about the conversation they had had with the children the previous evening, when Charlotte had asked if becoming queen meant she would have to stop playing with her dolls. The innocent question had broken Kate's heart, highlighting how much their children's lives were changing through no choice of their own. "There's something I need to tell you," Harry continued, his tone becoming more formal. "I've been asked to take on additional duties during the transition period to help support William as he settles into his new role." Kate looked up with surprise and gratitude. The idea of having Harry's support during this challenging time felt like an unexpected gift, especially given the family tensions that had existed for so long. "Does this mean you're considering returning to full royal duties?" she asked carefully, not wanting to assume too much. "I'm considering what's best for the family and the institution," Harry replied diplomatically. "This transition is bigger than any personal differences we've had. William needs all the support he can get, and I want to be part of providing that." Before Kate could respond, the sound of voices in the hallway indicated that William had returned from his morning meetings. She could hear the formal tones of his private secretary discussing the afternoon's schedule, but underneath that, she detected the subtle strain in William's voice that only she would recognize. When he entered the room, Kate immediately went to him, wrapping her arms around him in the kind of embrace that had sustained them through every challenge they had faced together. She felt him relax slightly in her arms, some of the tension leaving his shoulders as he held her close. "How was the meeting?" she asked softly. "Overwhelming but productive," William replied. "There are so many moving pieces, so many traditions, and protocols that need to be observed while still allowing for necessary modernization." Harry stood up, preparing to leave them alone, but William gestured for him to stay. "Actually, I'm glad you're both here. I wanted to discuss the coronation plans." Kate's breath caught at the mention of the coronation, the ceremony that would formally crown William as king and her as queen consort. They had discussed it in abstract terms during their briefings, but hearing William speak about it made everything feel suddenly, dramatically real. "The Archbishop and the Earl Marshal want to begin detailed planning immediately," William continued. "The ceremony is tentatively scheduled for 6 months from now, which gives us time to prepare but doesn't allow for extended delays." Kate thought about what 6 months would mean. 6 months to master her new role, to help their children adjust, to prove to the nation and the world that they were ready for the responsibilities they were inheriting. 6 months to transform from the people they had been into the monarchs Britain needed them to become. As the afternoon wore on and meetings filled their schedule, Kate found herself drawing strength from the knowledge that she and William were facing these challenges together. The door to their old life had closed, but the door to their future remained wide open, filled with possibilities and responsibilities they were only beginning to understand. 6 months later, the morning of the coronation arrived with unprecedented fanfare throughout London. Kate woke before dawn in the state apartments of Buckingham Palace, her heart racing with a mixture of anticipation and terror that had become familiar over the past half-year. Through the tall windows she could see the crowds that had been gathering since the previous evening, their excitement palpable even from her elevated position within the palace walls. The transformation had been remarkable to witness. What had begun as a crisis had evolved into something approaching triumph, though not without its challenges. The children had adapted better than expected, with George showing a maturity beyond his years as he began to understand his future role. Charlotte embracing her new status with characteristic confidence, and Louis remaining blissfully focused on his toys and games despite the chaos surrounding him. William stirred beside her, and Kate turned to study his profile in the early morning light. The past 6 months had aged him in some ways, adding lines of concentration around his eyes and a gravity to his bearing that spoke of the weight he now carried. But there was also a new sense of purpose about him, a confidence that came from rising to meet an enormous challenge and discovering he was capable of handling it. "Are you ready for this?" he asked softly, his voice still rough with sleep. "I don't think anyone could ever be truly ready for what we're about to do," Kate replied honestly. "But I'm ready to do it with you." The morning passed in a blur of preparations that had been rehearsed countless times over the previous months. Kate's gown, a masterpiece of British craftsmanship that managed to honor tradition while reflecting her personal style, felt both familiar and foreign as her dresser helped her into it. The weight of the fabric seemed to anchor her to the magnitude of the moment, while the delicate embroidery told the story of a nation placing its trust in her and William. In the adjoining room, she could hear the controlled chaos of William's preparation, the quiet voices of his valets and private secretary, ensuring that every detail of his appearance met the exacting standards required for such a historic occasion. The sound was comforting in its normalcy, a reminder that despite the extraordinary nature of the day, they were still the same couple who had faced every challenge together. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts, and Kate was surprised to see her parents enter the room. Michael and Carol Middleton looked simultaneously proud and overwhelmed, their ordinary Berkshire backgrounds a sharp contrast to the royal grandeur surrounding them. Yet they had adapted to their daughter's extraordinary life with grace and dignity that had impressed even the most traditional courtiers. "You look absolutely beautiful, darling," her mother said, tears threatening to spill from her eyes as she took in the sight of her daughter in full royal regalia. More importantly, her father added with the practical wisdom that had guided Kate throughout her life, "You look like yourself. Don't let anyone make you forget who you are underneath all of this." Their words provided exactly the grounding Kate needed as the final preparations continued around them. She thought about the young woman who had met William at university, never imagining that their relationship would lead to this moment. The journey had been longer and more complex than either of them could have anticipated, filled with joy and heartbreak, triumph and controversy, but it had brought them to this day when they would formally commit themselves to serving something larger than their individual desires. The children appeared next, dressed in their ceremonial outfits and looking both excited and slightly overwhelmed by the day's significance. George wore his page's uniform with obvious pride, while Charlotte had been thrilled to be included in the ceremony as one of the flower girls. Louis, still young enough to be somewhat confused by the proceedings, clung to Kate's hand as if sensing that today was different from their usual royal engagements. "Mama, will it hurt when they put the crown on your head?" Charlotte asked with the directness that Kate had always loved about her daughter. "Not at all, sweetheart," Kate assured her. "It might feel a little heavy at first, but I'll get used to it." What she didn't say was that the physical weight of the crown would be nothing compared to the symbolic weight of what it represented, the responsibility for an entire nation's well-being, the obligation to embody the hopes and values of millions of people, the commitment to sacrifice personal desires for the greater good. These were the true burdens that came with the coronation, and they would last far beyond the ceremony itself. As the morning progressed, members of the extended royal family began gathering in the palace's state rooms. Anne arrived with her characteristic efficiency, offering Kate a warm smile and a brief hug that conveyed both support and respect for the magnitude of what she was undertaking. Edward and Sophie brought their children, who would also participate in the ceremony, creating a sense of family continuity that helped normalize the extraordinary nature of the day. The most emotionally significant arrival was that of Charles, who had insisted on attending despite his declining health. His presence provided a tangible link between the monarchy's past and its future, and his obvious pride in William and Kate offered a blessing that meant more than any formal endorsement could have provided. Harry had been instrumental in the planning and preparation for the coronation, his support helping to heal the rifts that had divided the family for so long. When he entered the room where the family was gathering, Kate saw William's expression lighten with genuine happiness at his brother's presence. The sight reminded her that even in the midst of historic ceremony and constitutional duty, they were still a family who loved and supported each other. As the procession to Westminster Abbey began, Kate found herself in the Golden State Coach, the same vehicle that had carried generations of monarchs to their coronations. The cheering crowds lining the route created a wall of sound that was both exhilarating and humbling, their enthusiasm a testament to the enduring power of the monarchy to inspire hope and unity. Inside the ancient walls of Westminster Abbey, surrounded by representatives from around the world and watched by millions more through television and internet coverage, Kate felt the full weight of history settling around her. The ceremony itself unfolded with the precision that comes from centuries of tradition, each word and gesture carrying meaning that connected the present moment to an unbroken chain of service stretching back through the ages. When the Archbishop of Canterbury placed the Queen Consort's crown on her head, Kate felt a profound sense of transformation that went far beyond the symbolic nature of the act. She was no longer simply Kate Middleton, who had married a prince, or even Catherine, Duchess of Cambridge. She was now Queen Catherine, partner to King William V, and together they would guide the monarchy into its next chapter. As they emerged, from the Abbey to the thunderous approval of the crowds, Kate caught William's eye and saw her own mixture of awe and determination reflected in his gaze. The door to their old life had closed completely, but the door to their future as monarchs stood wide open, filled with possibilities they were only beginning to explore. The weight of the crown on her head was nothing compared to the weight of the nation's trust in her heart, but with William beside her and their family's support surrounding them, Kate knew they were ready to carry that burden together. The tears that had threatened throughout the day finally spilled over, not from sadness or fear, but from the overwhelming recognition that they had crossed a threshold from which there was no return, and that somehow, despite everything that had brought them to this moment, it felt exactly right.